Hey guys, tonight we step into the shadows of medieval Europe, where fear of leprosy turned neighbors into executioners. Picture yourself trudging through a misty village, the air heavy with wood smoke and dread. A bell clangs nearby, warning of a leper, and eyes peer from doorways, judging you. You're not sick, but one wrong cough, and you're headed for a cleansing ritual. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I'm curious where you're at. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a world where leprosy, or Hansen's disease, wasn't just a sickness, it was a curse. By the 12th century, lepers were outcasts, their sores and scars seen as divine punishment. The cleansing ritual, a grim practice of burying lepers alive, emerged from this panic. It wasn't universal, but in pockets of Europe, I think France, Germany, or England's fringes, communities believed entombing a leper purified the village. You're imagining a dirt pit, a shovel scrape, and a crowd muttering prayers. It's not a horror flick. It's history, and you're about to walk through it. Let's set the stage. Leprosy spread fear like wildfire in the Middle Ages, with maybe 19,000 leper colonies, or laser houses, dotting Europe by 1300. That's the mainstream fact. These colonies were both hospitals and prisons, isolating lepers to protect the clean. But the burial ritual, that's where things get dark. Some villages, gripped by superstition, thought a leper's presence tainted the land itself. Burying them alivesamitans in a symbolic mass first was their twisted fix. You're wondering how anyone justified this, and honestly, so am I. Here's the quirky tidbit. In certain French villages, they dress lepers in white shrouds before burial, calling it a wedding to death. Picture you in a ghostly gown, paraded like a bride to a grave. It's almost poetic, until you remember the dirt piling up. Historians still argue whether these rituals were driven by religious zeal or raw fear of disease. Some say it was faith in God's wrath. Others think it was just humans scapegoating the sick to feel safe. Either way, you're not feeling safe as you imagine standing at the edge of that pit. The fear wasn't baseless. Leprosy disfigured, crumbling noses, numb limbs, and medieval medicine was about as helpful as a spoon in a sword fight. People thought it spread through breath or touch, though we now know it's bacterial and not that contagious. But back then, you're a leper, you're a walking plague. Villages built walls, literal and social, to keep you out. The burial ritual was the ultimate wall, a grave to seal you away from the living. You're starting to feel the weight of those stares, the villagers' whispers like needles in your skin. They're not seeing you, they're seeing sin, disease, a threat to their crops and kids. A priest looms nearby, cross in hand, ready to bless your cleansing. It's not personal. They'd say it's holy. But as you glance at that open pit, the dirt walls glistening with damp, you're not buying the holiness angle. This is fear dressed in prayer, and you're the sacrifice. The bell clangs again, closer now, and you're wondering how it all came to this. You're still in that misty village, the bells clang, fading as you're led toward a patch of earth that's been freshly dug. The crowd keeps their distance, their faces a mix of pity and disgust, but nobody's stepping in to save you. The cleansing ritual is about to unfold, and you're at the heart of its grim mechanics. This isn't just a burial, it's a carefully choreographed act, every step dripping with superstition, and meant to scrub the village clean of your supposed curse. You're wondering how it works, and trust me, it's as chilling as it sounds. Picture the setup. You're standing by a shallow pit, maybe 3 feet deep, the soil dark and clammy. Your hands are bound with rough hemp, not tight enough to hurt but enough to remind you there's no running. A priest mutters Latin, sprinkling holy water that stings your skin with its cold. You're draped in that white shroud, remember, that wedding to death nonsense, and it clings to you like damp paper. The ritual's core is simple. They lower you into the pit alive and cover you with earth. Sometimes they stop short, pulling you out as a symbolic cleansing, Other times, they don't. You're hoping for the symbolic version, but the crowd's grim faces aren't reassuring. Here's the mainstream fact. Medieval records, like the 13th century charters of French lazar houses, describe these rituals as rare but real, often tied to local customs rather than church-wide doctrine. They were used when a leper was deemed beyond salvation, a last-ditch effort to protect the community. The process varied. Some got a mock funeral first, others were buried and unearthed, but the goal was always the same: erase the leper's taint, body and soul. Now the quirky tidbit: in some English villages, they'd place a clod of earth on your chest before burial, calling it the weight of sin. Imagine lying there feeling that cold lump pressed down, while the priest drones on about purification. It's like they thought your soul needed a paperweight to stay put. Nobody checked if the clod made breathing harder. Medieval OSHA wasn't a thing. Historians still argue whether these rituals were meant to kill or just terrify. Some say the burials were mostly theatrical, a way to scare lepers into exile. Others point to skeletal remains found in shallow graves, suggesting some didn't get the symbolic memo. Either way, you're not loving your odds as you're nudged toward the pit's edge. The crowd's whispers like a low hum in your ears. The mechanics get weirder. Before you're lowered, they might make you drink a bitter herb brew supposedly to cleanse your insides. It tastes like regret and probably does nothing, but they swear it's holy. Then two men, usually the village's burliest, grab you under the arms and ease you into the pit. You're lying flat now, staring at a sky framed by dirt walls. The priest tosses in a handful of earth, and you flinch as it hits your face. If you're lucky, this is where they stop, hauling you out to cheers of cleansed. If not, well, the shovels are ready. Here's a grim joke. They called it a cleansing, but the only thing getting cleaned was their conscience. You're starting to see the ritual's twisted logic bury the problem, and the village sleeps better. The crowd's watching, some clutching rosaries, others just here for the show. A kid in the back's munching on a turnip, like this is a market day special. You want to scream that you're not cursed, that leprosy's just a disease, but your voice feels buried already. As the first shovel of dirt lands, you hold your breath, praying this is the symbolic kind. The earth's heavy, smelling of roots and worms, and you're wondering how anyone thought this was justice. The priest's still chanting, the crowd still staring, and you're just a body in a pit, caught in a ritual that's half prayer, half panic. Whether you walk away or not, one thing's clear: this isn't about you, it's about them, and their fear of what you represent. You're still lying in that damp pit, the taste of earth lingering as you're hauled out, gasping, the crowd's murmurs washing over you like a tide. The cleansing ritual's done for now, but you're not free. The priest who blessed this ordeal is already prepping his next sermon, and you're starting to see the church's fingerprints all over this nightmare. They're not just bystanders, they're the architects, turning fear of leprosy into a holy crusade. You're brushing dirt from your shroud, wondering how a religion of love sanctified something so cruel. Picture yourself in a 13th century village, the church's stone tower looming like a judgmental giant. The church was the heartbeat of medieval life, and when it came to lepers, it had a lot to say. Leprosy wasn't just a disease, it was a spiritual failing, a sign God was angry. The burial ritual, with its pit and prayers, was sold as a divine fix: cleanse the leper, cleanse the land. Priests led the charge, framing your suffering as a necessary sacrifice. You're not just a person anymore, you're a symbol, and the church is writing your story. Here's the mainstream fact. The Catholic Church, particularly in the High Middle Ages, endorsed leper segregation and rituals through decrees like the 1179 Third Lateran Council. This council urged isolating lepers in lazar houses and supported purification rites, including mock burials, to mark them as spiritually dead. The church didn't mandate live burials everywhere, but it gave local clergy a green light to get creative, and some took it to grim extremes. Now the quirky tidbit: in parts of Italy, priests would sprinkle lepers with holy dust during the ritual, scraped from church altars. Imagine you're choking on this gritty mix of ash and incense, while they claim it's chasing demons from your soul. It's like a medieval air freshener for sin, and about as effective. Nobody questioned if the dust was sanitary. Germ theory was centuries away. Historians still argue whether the church genuinely believed lepers were cursed or if it used them to flex power. Some say clergy saw leprosy as biblical, straight out of Leviticus, and burials as God's will. Others argue it was crowd control, channeling village panic into rituals that kept the church in charge. Either way, you're not feeling the holy vibes as you stand there, dirt-streaked and shivering. The scene around you is heavy with incense and hypocrisy. The priest, in his embroidered vestments, looks like he's directing a play, not saving souls. He's chanting about purification, but his eyes are on the crowd, making sure they're buying it. Villagers kneel, clutching crosses, convinced your burial symbolic or not keeps their fields fertile and their kids safe. It's a performance, and you're the prop. Here's a dry joke. They called it a holy rite, but the only thing sacred was their need to feel clean. The church's logic is a maze. They'd preach charity. Think of those laser houses, where monks cared for leprosy at turnaround and bless pits like the one you just climbed out of. It's like they wanted to help you and bury you at the same time. The Bible was their script, with verses about unclean bodies twisted to justify your exile. You're starting to see the pattern. The church didn't just sanction this, it made it feel inevitable, like God himself signed off on the shovels. As you're led away, the crowd parts like you're contagious, which, to them, you are. The priest's voice carries, promising salvation for the village now that you've been cleansed. You want to yell that you're still here, still human, but the words stick in your throat. The church has turned your pain into a sermon, your life into a warning. The pit's behind you, but its shadow follows, and you're wondering how many others are still lying in theirs, buried under the weight of holy fear. You're stumbling through the village now, the weight of that damp shroud dragging at your shoulders, the echo of the priest's chants still ringing in your ears. The pit's behind you, but you're not out of the woods or the grave yet. You're a leper, marked by sores and superstition, and the village as one final act in store, a cleansing burial that's no dress rehearsal. You're about to walk the path of one soul, maybe a woman like you, who's facing the real thing, the living grave meant to erase her from the world. Picture yourself in a 14th century French hamlet. The sky bruised with clouds. You're her now, let's call her Agnes, a weaver until leprosy stole your fingers' nimbleness. The villagers, once your neighbors, now shrink from you, their whispers sharp as thorns. You're led from the laser house, a crumbling shed on the village's edge, to a field where a pit waits, its mouth open like a hungry beast. Your bell, the one you're forced to ring to warn others, is silent now. Nobody needs warning when they're all here to watch. The crowd's faces blur into a sea of fear, and you're wondering if anyone remembers the shawls you wore for their weddings. Here's the mainstream fact. Archaeological evidence, like 13th century graves in northern France, shows some lepers were buried in shallow pits with signs of restraint, suggesting live burials occurred, though rarely. These weren't mass practices but desperate acts in isolated communities, often after a leper was deemed a walking curse by local clergy or lords. Agnes, you are one of those rare cases, chosen to calm a village spiraling into panic over a bad harvest they blame on your sickness. Now the quirky tidbit, in some regions, they'd give lepers a farewell gift before burial, a loaf of bread or a coin, tucked into your shroud like you're off on a trip. Imagine you, Agnes, clutching a stale crust as they lower you into the dirt, as if bread will help where prayers failed. It's darkly absurd, like packing a snack for the apocalypse. Nobody asked if you were hungry. It was just tradition, another box to check. Historians still argue whether these burials were meant as mercy or punishment. Some say they spared lepers a life of exile, a quick end over slow starvation. Others call it cruelty, a way to erase the sick without guilt. Either way, you're not feeling merciful as you're nudged toward the pit, your bare feet sinking into the mud. The scene is grimly quiet, The crowds hushed, save for a child's sob quickly shushed. The priest, the same one who blessed that holy dust earlier, is here again, his cross glinting in the dim light. He's reading from a psalter, voice low like he's soothing a dying animal. Two men grab your arms, their grip firm but not rough. They've done this before. You're lowered into the pit, the earth cold against your back, the shrouds too thin, and you shiver as the first clod of dirt falls, hitting your chest like a fist. You want to scream, but your throat's dry and the crowd's watching, waiting for the cleansing to work its magic. Here's a soft joke. They called it a grave, but it was really just a bad airbun. You're trying to hold onto that thought to keep your mind from the dirt piling up. Agnes, you're thinking of your loom, the rhythm of weaving, anything but the weight pressing down. The priest's voice fades and the crowd starts to hum a hymn, their voices wobbly but sure. They believe this is right, that your burial heals their land, their souls. You're not a person to them anymore. You're a problem solved. As the earth covers your legs, your chest, you're fighting to breathe, to remember you're still alive. The bread in your shroud crumbles under the dirt's weight, useless. The crowd's in grows louder, drowning out your heartbeat. You're Agnes, and this is your end, or so they think. The pit's closing over you, but your story, the truth of your life, doesn't vanish so easily. The village will sleep better tonight, but you're wondering if they'll ever face what they've done. You're no longer Agnes, but her story clings to you like the damp earth of that pit. You're back in the village, standing among the crowd now, your breath catching as the final clods of dirt seal her away. The hymn fades, and the villagers disperse, some with bowed heads, others with a spring in their step, as if the cleansing has lifted a curse. You're not one of them, but you feel their fear, their relief, their complicity. This burial wasn't just a priest's idea, it was a community effort, fueled by panic and a mob's need to point fingers. Picture yourself on the edge of this 14th century hamlet, the air thick with the scent of turned soil and fading incense. The pit's filled in, a fresh mound marking where Agnes lies, or maybe where she was pulled out, if she was lucky. The crowd's not just a backdrop, they're the engine of this ritual. They're your neighbors, your baker, your childhood friend, all united by the belief that leprosy threatens their world. You're watching them, and you're wondering how fear turned them into cheerleaders for a living grave. Here's the mainstream fact. Medieval communities often supported leper segregation and rituals, as shown in 13th century town records from places like Cologne, where citizens funded lazar houses and cleansing ceremonies. These acts weren't just top-down. Villagers pitched in, donating food or labor, believing they were protecting their collective soul. The burial ritual, rare as it was, thrived on this groupthink, with mobs turning out to witness or even help dig the pit. Now the quirky tidbit, in some English villages, they'd plant a thorn bush over the burial site, thinking it trapped the leper's evil spirit. Imagine you spotting that prickly shrub sprouting where Agnes was buried, a botanical jail for a ghost. It's like they thought her soul might sneak out for revenge. Paranoid much. Nobody checked if thorns actually worked. It was just another layer of superstition. Historians still argue whether the mob's support came from genuine terror or social pressure. Some say villagers truly feared lepers as walking plagues, blaming them for everything from droughts to sick livestock. Others argue it was conformity. Nobody wanted to be the one defending a cursed outcast. Either way, you're uneasy standing among them, their faces flushed with a mix of guilt and glee. The scene pulses with raw energy. The crowd's not a monolith. Some women clutch their shawls, eyes wet, maybe remembering Eggs's kindness. Others, mostly men, swap grim jokes, their laughter sharp and forced. A kid tugs at his mother's skirt, asking why the lady had to go in the ground. She shushes him, but her hands tremble. You're catching their mood, a stew of dread and defiance. Here's a grim joke. They called it a community effort, but the only thing they built was a bigger pile of regrets. You notice the details: baker's flour-dusted apron, the blacksmith's sooty hands, all part of this grim pageant. They're not evil, just scared, and that scares you more. Fear made them dig that pit, fear made them sing that hymn, Fear made them believe Agnes was their problem. You're starting to see how it works. The priest points, the crowd nods, and suddenly a weaver's a witch, a leper's a curse. It's not about proof, it's about feeling safe, even if it means burying someone alive. As the crowd thins, you linger by the mound. The thorn bush hasn't been planted yet, but you can imagine it, sharp and stubborn. The village feels quieter, like it's exhaled a poison. But you're not buying the calm. Agnes is gone, or maybe she's not. Some cleansings ended with a rescue, a second chance. But the mob's already looking for the next threat, the next scapegoat. You're wondering how many pits they'll dig before they realize fear's the real curse, not leprosy. The wind picks up, stirring the dirt, and you turn away carrying Agnes's story with you. You're walking away from the freshly covered pit, the village's hush settling like dust. The thorn bush hasn't sprouted yet, but the weight of Agnes's burial are her narrow escape lingers in the air. You're starting to wonder why this ritual, this brutal cleansing of lepers, didn't last forever. The shovels are still out, the priest still preaching, but cracks are forming in the system. The practice of burying lepers alive is fading, and you're about to trace the slow and even path of its decline, like watching a fever break. Picture yourself in a 15th century European town, where the marketplace hums with new ideas. The Black Death has come and gone, leaving a world that's questioning old fears. Leprosy's still around, but it's not the boogeyman it once was. The cleansing burials, already rare, are starting to feel like relics, gruesome traditions that don't sit right with a society inching toward reason. You're standing in a square where a new hospital's being built, not a laser house, and you're sensing a shift, like the ground steadying after a quake. Here's the mainstream fact. By the late 1400s, medical and legal reforms began eroding leper burial rituals. The rise of early hospitals, like those funded by merchant guilds in Italy, offered care over exile, and texts like the 1498 Liber de Morbo Gallico started framing leprosy as a treatable disease, not a curse. Courts, too, lean toward fines or banishment over dramatic rituals, especially as secular laws grew stronger than church decrees. Now the quirky tidbit: in some German towns, the ritual hung on as a symbolic gesture into the 1500s, but with a twist. They'd bury an empty shroud instead of a person. Imagine you watching them toss a lonely rag into a pit, like it's the disease itself they're burying. It's like a medieval placebo, all drama and no death. Nobody questioned if it worked. It was just a way to keep the old vibes alive without the body count. Historians still argue whether the decline was driven by compassion or pragmatism. Some say growing medical knowledge. Think early apothecaries mixing salvas made people see lepers as patients, not sinners. Others argue it was economics. Laser houses were pricey, and burying people was bad for the labor pool. Either way, you're relieved to be in a town where pits are for planting, not people. The scene around you is changing. The church still looms, but its grip's loosening. A doctor, not a priest, is inspecting sores in the new hospital, using herbs instead of holy dust. Villagers still fear leprosy, but they're starting to whisper about treatments, not burials. The mob's still out there, ready to panic, but they're distracted by other scapegoat switches, heretics, you name it. Here's a dry joke. They stopped burying lepers when they realized dirt was cheaper for gardens than graves. You notice the old laser house, half abandoned, its walls crumbling like the rituals it once served. The bell lepers used to ring lies rusty in a corner, silent. The church isn't pushing cleansings anymore. They're too busy with indulgences and reform debates. Secular lords, smelling profit, are funding hospitals to look pious without the bloodshed. It's not a golden age. Lepers are still shunned, but you're not dodging shovels anymore. The ritual's fading, not because people got kinder, but because it stopped making sense. As you walk past the hospital, you hear a patient coughing inside, not a death knell but a call for care. The pit where Agnes lay is just a memory, maybe a mound overgrown with weeds. The decline feels fragile. Thou superstition's a stubborn weed. And you've heard of villages clinging to old ways, sneaking burials when the bishop's not looking. But for now the shovels are down, and you're wondering if this new world will learn from the old one's mistakes. Here's clearer. But the past's shadow is long, and you're carrying its lessons with you. You're standing in that 15th century town, the hospital's faint herb scent replacing the reek of fear. But the memory of Agnes's pit still tugs at you. The leper burials are mostly gone, fading like a bad dream. Yet their echo lingers in how we view sickness and justice today. You're stepping into the present, where the world's brighter but not spotless, and you're about to see how those medieval cleansings left marks on our minds, our medicine, and the way we treat the outcast. Picture yourself in a modern city, maybe your own, where hospitals hum with machines, not prayers. Leprosy's a footnote now, treatable with antibiotics since the 1940s. But you're noticing how we still bury people not with dirt, but with stigma. Think mental illness, addiction, or even rare diseases. We don't dig pits, but we sideline those who don't fit our idea of clean. The leper's bell is gone, but you hear its echo in whispered judgments, and the way society isolates the tainted. You're wondering if we've really moved past those shallow graves. Here's the mainstream fact. The history of leprosy shaped modern public health, with medieval laser houses inspiring early quarantine systems. 1873 discovery of Hansen's bacillus by Gerhard Hansen proved leprosy was bacterial, not cursed, leading to sanatoriums that echoed those old colonies scare with a side of segregation. The burial rituals, though rare, left a blueprint for how fear can twist medicine into punishment. Now the quirky tidbit, some modern phrases, like social leper, might trace back to those outcast days. Imagine you joking about being a leper at a party, not realizing you're nodding to centuries of shunning. It's like calling someone a witch without thinking of the dunking stool. History hides in our words, sneaky as ever. Nobody pauses to connect the dots, but you're starting to see the threads. Historians still argue whether the leper burials taught us empathy or entrenched our fear of the other. Some say they forced us to face human suffering, paving the way for charitable hospitals. Others argue they normalized scapegoating, a habit we still indulge when we vilify the sick or different. Either way, you're uneasy, wondering how much of that mob's panic lives in today's headlines. The scene shifts to your world. You're scrolling news on your phone, and there's a story about a disease outbreak. Comments below screaming for quarantine or worse. It's not a pit, but it's the same vibe. Point, judge, isolate. Here's a quiet joke. We don't bury lepers anymore, but we're great at burying inconvenient truths. You're seeing the pattern. Fear makes us quick to cleanse, whether it's with laws, tweets, or cold shoulders. The leper's story, Agnes's story, feels close, like a warning we haven't fully heeded. You think of modern medicine, its triumphs and blind spots. Leprosy's nearly eradicated, but stigma isn't. Patients still face shame, like those in remote clinics hiding their scars. You're reminded of that thorn bush planted to trap a leper's spirit. Today's thorns are subtler, but they still prick. We've swapped shrouds for diagnoses, but the urge to bury what scares us runs deep. You're wondering if we'll ever learn to face fear without digging graves, literal or not. As you set your phone down, the city's hum feels distant. The leper burials are history, but their lesson isn't. Don't let fear write the story. Agnes, her loom, her stolen life, they are a reminder to see people, not plagues. You're safe, no pits waiting, but the past asks you to carry its weight lightly, to build a world that heals instead of hides. You're back in your room now, the glow of your screen fading as the night wraps around you. The story of the leper burial slips away, soft as a sigh, its heavy earth lifting from your chest. Let the village's fear, the pit's chill, dissolve into the quiet hum of your fan. You're here, warm, whole, in a world that's learning slowly to choose care over curses. Imagine a gentle breeze, sweeping away the thorns of old judgments, leaving only peace. The past rests, its lessons tucked safe in your mind. Close your eyes, drift into stillness, and let the night cradle you. Good night, friend, until the next tale calls.